in YouTube land, and we'll be set here in one moment. All right, we are live, and of course we have the one, the only, Mr. Brian Weiss with
Uh,
iTech Solutions. And today we are going to talk about selling outcomes, uh, outcomes, not just tech. Of course, you can sell outcomes if you want, but we're going to sell outcomes, not just tech. And it's something that I think, we've talked a lot about on our calls. And, it's really interesting as we, are going to different events. I think, across the board, this type of discussion is, continuing. One of the things that, last night I did an interview with Craig Donovan, the Chief Experience Officer for PAX 8. We talked about the whole shift to being MIP, managed information provider, and I think one of the things, or managed intelligence provider, I should say. So just the shift from being a managed services provider to a managed intelligence provider. Not that we necessarily are changing what we're called as far as MSPs, but I think it's more of a mindset shift. And one of the things that I talked about in our recording with him is that for the last couple of decades, the biggest way to differentiate yourself was moving from being break fix to a managed services provider. And then as that has happened, we've shifted from being an MSP that's outcome focused versus being tech driven and leading with tech. And I think as we think about that, if we're not today focused on outcome, we are behind the eight ball, and we aren't truly differentiating ourselves from any other MSP that's out there, and we're clearly just a managed services provider because it is all about the outcome. With that being said, what's ahead of us is pretty exciting because as we take a look at shifting our focus on being a managed intelligence provider, that's taking outcome and putting it on steroids. It's taking it to a whole new level and truly looking at how AI agents can allow us to, really revolutionize, the SMB market and revolutionize how SMBs run their day-to-day operations. Sam Altman, I don't know if I mentioned this in a previous call, but Sam Altman came out and indicated that very soon there will be a billion-dollar business that is done by an individual that's leveraging all AI. Now, we're not going to be talking all about AI today. We're going to be talking about business outcomes, but think about that. A billion-dollar operation run by one person leveraging AI tools. And, I think some would be happy with, maybe just cutting that in half, or even a percentage of that by being able to leverage the tools. I believe in the article it talked about how with proper use of different AI tools, one person can do the work of 15 to 20 people. And, I'm sure those numbers there, you know, could change drastically and really be different based on what tools you're using. But the clear, you know, point here is that we need to be working with our clients and helping them take their business to the next level. Yes, we do use tech, and tech is how that can be achieved. but the conversations to get to that point aren't about tech. It's about what are their goals and objectives and what can we do to help them get to that point. So with that being said, you guys all know Brian. For anybody out there in YouTube land that isn't familiar with Brian, if you could give us, just a brief introduction of yourself, that would be awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Brian Weiss, CEO of iTech Solutions. We just hit our 20th year. So kind of school of hard knocks when it comes to running a business, engineer at heart. Love AI. I'll try not to talk about AI too much. We're based out of San Luis Obispo County area, California, and currently have a team of 10 employees, including me. So not a huge MSP, also not a small one. And we service both fully managed clients, have about 40 of those, as well as about 10 co-managed clients. So we do work from the small business up into the mid-market space as well.
Excellent. And Brian, do you have anything to share as far as a slide deck? And if you don't, that's completely fine.
Not necessarily.
Okay,
I like kind of just
open
chatting it
discussion.
up.
Yeah,
Slide decks tend to distract me and cause me to lose track of what
yeah.
I think helps keep people drawn into a conversation. So, yeah, nothing today like that.
Okay. No, completely fine. So, I guess anybody that does have questions as we, continue on, please feel free to jump in. But, from your perspective, Brian, what does it really mean to sell outcome?
It's I will tell you, it's easier with new leads to kind of set this expectation than it is existing clients. And so maybe I'll talk high level and then we'll dive into kind of what our
Okay.
experiences has been between existing clients and new clients. But the approach we like to use is, I feel like in the past 20 years, we really focus on technology. We're an IT company. I'm an engineer at heart. Technology is always front of mind. But one of the things I feel like we've been missing that really helps us focus on business outcomes is encompassing, the triad or the triangle of people, process, and technology to the point where, you're really saving technology for a later discussion and focusing on understanding the people and the process with your clients. Who are the main stakeholders? We typically have four areas we look at in a business, no matter how big they are. They might be shared roles if it's a small enough business, but we've got, operations, HR. What does that mean? Onboarding, offboarding of employees, right? What kind of processes are there? Um, Finance, obviously, we want to get stakeholder that we know is responsible for finance. And then the fourth one is might be considered a little ambiguous or shared across multiple areas, but it's risk. Like who's making decisions around risk. And and then, ultimately building like a tech committee out of those stakeholders that we consult to and interview and get very curious with and help them understand, hey, this IT thing is really a shared responsibility. And before we can even understand how to help you with technology, we really want to learn more about your people and process, right? And that's going to be, things like trying to understand what does their current business state look like? And you're going to get different answers based on these different stakeholders. What are their challenges that they feel like they're facing, whether it's technology related or not? What impact might those challenges have? And then what does a future business state look like that they would hope to be at, after we can eliminate some of these challenges? And what does that look like? Ultimately, trying to get to what business outcomes might they hope to achieve in this future business state? And even more so, how might we measure for results to understand that we actually are reaching those business outcomes? And one last thing I'll point out as well, I do mention, it's important to get the stakeholders involved and understand, that there's this kind of tech committee, if you will, that's what we're calling it. We're even curious about what we call end users in the company and what challenges they may have. Because if all you're talking with is the exec team the whole time, they may not understand challenges all the way down to the front end or the frontline workers, right? As Microsoft likes to reference them as. So eventually, especially if we're dealing with changes to the organization, a change in a line of business application, a change in processes or workflows, we also want to be interviewing end users, and we ultimately call these like user stories that we're collecting, right? So what's the user story that we're getting from the stakeholders and the end users around the challenges they're having and the impacts of those challenges? And then once you have kind of that interview process done where it's all about them, we're really not talking about you at all yet, then you have a better understanding of how you might fit technology in to help improve processes and get the people able to reach the business outcomes that they're looking for.
When you bring up, the end users, I think that is such a critical thing because the VIPs, if you will, those decision makers, I think it can be both things. One, they have no clue what's happening, in the day to day with some of their people because I think in some cases, because they are VIP, their needs are, someone jumps to them and takes care of those issues. And they are not afraid to say, I've got a problem. This is what my problem is. Where sometimes end users might, they might not be sure what's the best path or who to speak to, feel like, oh, this is just my problem. I'll deal with it. And others might be dealing with it in the organization. And that ultimately could be some kind of bottleneck. And, where that VIP doesn't have a problem, I mean, could be as simple as they've got the latest and
They,
greatest computer, right? Yeah, Eric, were you going to say something?
I was going to say, yeah, they got their TPS reports. So,
Yes, exactly,
uh-huh,
exactly.
uh-huh.
They get everything they need because of the position they're in, and others, are afraid to raise their hand and say, "I have a problem," because I don't want to, rock the boat here. But would you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. And I think where you can get into trouble is if you're only working with the C-suite or the exec team, the VIPs, and you're helping drive bit changes to the organization, only getting input from them, and you make a change, you could end up with end users that are unhappy with that change. And
Yeah,
now you've got the C-suite mad at you as the technology provider because they have their employees that are mad at them, and it's your fault because you recommended this change when really if we would have collected more user stories to understand the end users or at least involve them, right? Make them feel like they have some ownership in the changes and decisions that are being made so that even if it is a learning curve or a little painful to make a move to different technology, they feel like they're part of the journey instead
right,
of left outside of the journey, and they're more willing to help be more positive maybe with the changes and provide input that's not just all negative, right?
right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. When you have no say in the matter, people take things differently. So, I think I think the end users, when we talk about a committee, that the word committee sounds like, what, the organizations I work with, they might only have, 20 people or, how we're going to create this committee when, someone might think a committee is made up of 20 people. So a committee doesn't have to be, whether you work with 10 users, 25 users, 100 users, a couple hundred users, um, committee can be, represent the size of the organization. So I think it's important that each organization It might be a small committee, but I think it's still important to have that focus.
Yeah, and we have, excuse me, we have small businesses that are, maybe 5 employees.
Sure.
There's like one person on that committee. That doesn't mean we don't collect user stories from the rest of the employees. But the idea of forming that committee helps them understand that whoever's on the committee, whether it's one person, 2 people, 5 people, they're responsible for ultimately making the decisions. So we don't make it seem like we're part of that committee. We more consult to that committee, and that helps develop this kind of shared responsibility and the transfer of the fact that they own the decisions around their technology at the end of the day. Because the other problem that we've had in the past is clients, especially smaller ones, they tend to think, well, we hired you for IT. You make those decisions for us. We don't, why do I have to be involved with that? And I feel like if you're taking a people process technology approach where you are trying to help them achieve business outcomes, that type of relationship is going to be difficult to navigate and truly help them reach business outcomes if they're just expecting you to handle their decisions for them without wanting to be involved.
Right. Right. Why do you, and we'll be brief on this because, I think other than the obvious reason, but why do you think that many MSPs fall into that trap of being more focused on tech than the business outcome discussions that we need to have?
I think when I think about, my past situations where I've fallen into that trap, it's really because technology is what excites me the most.
Yeah.
Right. I have to, when I'm having discussions with clients, I have to hold back wanting to geek out on technology, you know, and so, I think and I have to hold back talking about myself too. I think as MSPs, we tend to, when we meet with clients, we want to talk about all the great things we're doing with technology and how we're going to help them with technology. And so it's, it's shifting the mindset to understand that it's really all about the client and that we shouldn't be trying to fit all our clients in a box. Yeah, we might have a cybersecurity stack we try to adhere to, right? But
Yeah.
that shouldn't be what's leading the discussion. When our proposals now are designed in a way where they don't look like the average proposal we used to use. It's really the first part is here's what we heard. And it's talking about all of their challenges, the impacts of those challenges, their future business state they'd like to get to. And then it talks about our people process technology approach and how we're going to help them overcome those challenges. That's really all our proposal is. So we try to tie back our technology, you know, to directly helping them achieve business outcomes versus here's our stack, and our stack's better than the next MSP, and this is why you should choose us. When a lot of that's kind of over the client's head, or they don't understand it, or they're just having to like compare proposals, apples to apples, like which one looks better on paper, because I don't really understand how it's all going to help me reach my business outcomes in the first point. I just need IT, and this is what I'm presented with, so I have to pick from these proposals.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, I think there is a fear of that's none of our business. Um,
I would agree with that. Yeah.
yeah, I think we feel like the technology component is our business, but if we're asking about their business, we're crossing a line, and we shouldn't be afraid of that because, in order for us to help them drive their business forward, we need to learn and get more intimate about their business.
Well, and that goes back to one of the first comments I said about how this process for us feels different from a new client versus an existing client.
Good point.
Existing
Yeah,
clients even start to question, why do you need to know all about this all about
right.
our business? Like you've been servicing us for 10 years. You've never needed to know all of this.
Mm.
Why now? And, at first I was a little pushy about it because I was so excited. And we actually lost a client after 16 years
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, they said, you know, we hired you to handle our IT. We don't really want to have to be as involved as you're needing us to be involved moving forward.
Oh, of
I,
course
I
not.
don't have the time to have this shared responsibility where we're sharing a lot more about our business with you than we've had to do in the past. Like,
Yeah.
and I feel like if I would have baby stepped it a little more instead of like, here's the new iTech and here's how we're doing things and here's why I think it's great for you, you know, maybe we wouldn't have lost them, you know.
How would you recommend handling those situations? So, I'm sure you've had other existing clients that you've wanted to kind of shift the conversation. What is the best way? What have you found to be most productive in getting them to get that buy-in about those different conversations without having them feel like, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, I will say, you know, you definitely want to address the any pain points they're feeling first, right? So, you know, I just had a meeting with a client yesterday, actually, where I started off, hey, I'm glad everyone's here. I want to talk strategy and, you know, understand each of your departments, what's going on. And and I didn't realize, but they start just talking about pain points, you know, and
Yeah,
like, well, you know, you didn't get to this ticket fast enough. This took a week and that. And I'm like, oh, this is account management stuff, you know.
right.
But if they feel like there's pain points that haven't been addressed first, it's going to be hard to start those strategy conversations because they see those pain points as like, and I see them too, is we got to get those out of the way first. Now that's to me more account management. So there's also resetting the expectation with our clients that, hey, there's some things that our account manager handles for you, but me as strategy, you know, but I walk through that with them. It's, you know, if they're unhappy about certain components of your existing service, they're going to be less likely to want to talk more about their business with you. So I feel like, you know, that's a challenge with an existing client. But if you can get over that hurdle, um, I, I think it's helping get them to understand that, like, you know, I tell clients, I want to get to know your business better. I want to understand your business in and out. I want to understand what does success mean to you? If they have clients they service, how do they keep their clients happy? Right? At the end of the day, it's kind of we're in a lot of times we're in the supply chain, right? Where ultimately our client has clients even that they service. So I think shifting the conversation around, you know, how do you keep your clients happier helps get them out of the technology and more
Yeah.
talking about their business maybe.
So we got to shift that conversation from service delivery pain points, which can be account management, to strategic pain points. So once you've got everybody on the same page and they understand that you're talking about strategic pain points, what are some ways to uncover that? Because I think sometimes when you bring up a topic like, what are your pain points? I think or even in some of these calls asking about what are some of the challenges you have in your business. Sometimes there's some blank stares, there's the what is there? And it takes some effort to be able to guide them and pull that information out. What have you found to be the best way?
So it helps if you've got like an industry vertical that you specialize in.
Okay.
Because a lot of times you kind of already know that and understand that. Um, you know, for example, we have one client that's in construction and they do a lot of RFPs with the government, right? And so I brought up, what does your RFP process look like? And where do you feel like you struggle? Because you're right, they were having trouble kind of, well, help me understand what you're talking about. The minute that you bring something up that you kind of know is a pain point in that industry, um,
Yeah.
you don't have to have clients in that industry. You can just research it. I mean, nowadays you can ask Copilot, right?
Right.
What are the common pain points in this industry? And it gives you some talking points to just kind of jog their memory, and then they just open right up. And before you know it, you're off to the races. If you're talking about like a departmental position like someone in HR, typically it's the hiring, firing process, or in our world, onboarding, offboarding, and you could just jump right into that, right? I'd like to get the onboarding process more streamlined for you. Do you feel like there's areas there that we can dig into? Um, if it's finance, typically they're managing the money. And so, and this one's a little trickier too, because that's, the minute you want to start helping them with their budget, that's them giving you information they haven't given you before if it's an existing client, or a new client if their expectation hasn't been set that, hey, IT helps me manage my budget and ultimately turn an IT expense into feeling more like an investment. They're going to hold those cards closer, right? So you kind of, I'm finding with budgeting, you kind of stair stepping your way into proving that, hey, we should really have a better understanding of your IT spending as a whole, not just what you're spending with us, and looking at, what's an OpEx expense, what's a CapEx expense, and are we properly budgeting for CapEx expenses typically related to life cycle management? And when it comes to OpEx expense, are we getting the proper return on investment with everything? Are we reviewing contracts that are coming up for renewal, even like ISPs, internet service providers, or copier companies? Like those are the
Right.
two I use to kind of break out of just talking about us. Is like, hey, let's look at these things maybe. Um, and then risk typically we're diving right into cybersecurity insurance. That's the easiest one. Like, who makes the decision around how much insurance you should have, and what type of insurance? And do you have cybersecurity insurance? Let's talk about that more. And then you're kind of digging into the questions and helping them understand items around risk. It's that's where you can get into the cybersecurity conversations. I would say, pulling it back to AI, we're really trying to drive cybersecurity as more of AI preparedness now as well. So we have kind
Okay.
of two angles to work with, so we can avoid fear, uncertainty, and doubt to sell cybersecurity. We
Yep.
can we can focus on cybersecurity insurance compliance, making sure we're compliant, and then that only checks so many boxes, right? Um, the questionnaires are getting more in depth. But what I love about AI preparedness is it aligns very well with a security framework, because
Yeah.
AI is all about the data. And technically, a security framework is all about protecting the data as well. It's not, users and devices are seen as cattle, even though that's a heavy focus because that's the easiest way to sell cybersecurity is per user, per device. What it really comes down to is how secure is your data? Where is your data? How can we consolidate that and stop the app spread where we've got 20 different apps with our data spread all out, which makes it harder to secure and harder to work with AI. So this
Right.
AI preparedness future, I love because it's helping us also improve cybersecurity as well as prepare them for AI.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that they have to jump into, or onto the AI bandwagon today,
Sure.
but when they're ready to do that, especially as we're talking about like agentic AI, where it's more agent based and there are actual activities that are going to take place. It's going to make a decision for you. It's not just something like Chat GPT that statically is just going to provide you with some information and it just sits there until you take some action. When we talk about them looking at, agentic AI and it's actually performing tasks, then that is going to have a big impact. And that's where cybersecurity is so critical because what could happen when it makes a decision for us, for them? And so that preparedness, I think, is great because I think many organizations are like, well, wait a minute, I don't even understand AI for us to even consider implementing, introducing it into our organizations. So I do like what you're talking about as far as aligning it with the security framework.
And there's one other thing I forgot to mention too. When there's a lot of shadow IT that's kind of happened over the years, especially as clients are moving to the cloud. And
Yeah,
there's an app for that. If you remember those commercials that taught a whole generation to just go out and get an app without consulting IT, they should have had kind of like the pharmaceutical commercials at the end. Be sure to consult IT before you go do this.
Yeah.
Um, so another good place to start too with our clients to just get them to think about, hey, we care more about than just what we're providing is talking to them about all the line of business applications they use because
Yeah.
most often they're using line of business apps that we're not really helping them manage on a
Yep.
day-to-day basis, especially if they're cloud-based. So developing out that list and even helping discover apps they may not realize that the company's using, right? There's software we have in our industry that can help discover, all the SaaS apps, the cloud apps that are being used by the whole organization. Which ones do they feel are most important? Which ones do they not even realize they're using? Creating an application policy, essentially, which aligns with a security framework to understand what applications are allowed versus not allowed. How can we consolidate this list? Are we even securing the identities to these applications? What about the data? Are these necessary? Are they clunky? Do they have challenges? Can we move them to something else? Even though it's an application we may not have even been helping them manage this whole time, can we help them discover a better way to do things?
Or or reduce costs, obviously, with
Yeah,
you've got someone using tools out there that could be accomplished in the same way using anything that's part of 365. It is really interesting. I mean, it goes well beyond just maybe somebody using Dropbox, right, when OneDrive's out there, but you also have digital transcriptions. Where they're trying to transcribe meetings when there's tools available, maybe built right within Teams or whatever the case may be. And I do know that at Beyond they threw out a number, and I don't want to throw a number out there, but it was an astronomical number. The number of SaaS tools that the average business uses that we probably don't have a clue that they're even using half of them. And so I think that I think that is a great area is, during those conversations to be learning about where people are reaching out and they're not trying to do anything malicious, they're just trying to do their job and do their job better. But if we don't have these business outcome discussions, then shadow IT only grows. And we can mute that by having the proper discussions, right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder, I wonder how small of the technology piece we might actually be managing once we do a lot of that discovery, and
Right.
helping the client understand that they're okay, you hired us to handle IT, you don't want to be involved, but you realize you're handling these other IT items without us, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so let's come to the table and talk about this as a team, approach.
Yeah.
And you made a comment of reduced costs. We do try to avoid that because I know at the end of the day, reducing cost is a benefit, but we really try to look at um, return on investment and
Mhm.
shifting from an idea of, hey, these are IT expenses to these are IT investments. And more often than not, if they are overspending in one area, we can identify another area they're underspending. So it's better to kind of try to shift the cost to give them an
Sure.
overall better return on investment.
Yeah.
And then my theory is, it's not just my theory, but today most, if not all businesses are technology businesses first. They really struggle or can't even deliver their products and services without technology. So when you work with finance and they're looking at their technology budget, if the company is wanting to grow, they shouldn't be looking at trying to shrink their IT budget as they grow. Ultimately, their IT budget should grow as they grow.
Yeah.
And so, because otherwise it's going to hinder their growth if they require technology to deliver their products and services, why does it make sense to try to shrink that budget as they're growing?
Yeah, no, and just for clarification, and I like where you're going with this, that
Yeah,
our client-facing conversation should be more about the return on investment.
yeah,
Um, I was talking more so about, if they're spending on Dropbox, they're spending on maybe Otter for doing some transcriptions, and they
sure.
have tools that they're already paying for. we can eliminate those. But what you're saying is, how do we repurpose those dollars into an area that could provide them a better ROI? But yeah, I think that that's spot on. Any questions out there from anybody right now as we're continuing on? Anyone? Um, so some of the things that we could take a look at is what about metrics and KPIs? Are you talking with your clients about that? Are you getting involved into like what their KPIs are? And, because again, that is one of those conversations that's like, well, wait a minute. I don't know that you need to know about, what is our client acquisition costs, or, I don't think you need to know what our service delivery cost is, but it only helps us in getting an understanding of where maybe we can have an impact on that.
Yeah, I think at the very least, when it comes to KPIs and metrics, and as we discover business outcomes they're hoping to reach, we need to know how to measure for success with those business outcomes. So
Right.
if you're here right now, and you're hoping to reach a business outcome that's over here, how do we know we even made it there? What type of KPIs or metrics should we be looking at? Right. And we all have our own internal ones, that we're used to using that are around like SLAs, for example, but those are our internal one when it comes to running IT for the client.
Yeah,
If we're driving a business outcome for them, you're right. We do have to ask them questions around those KPIs. Now, we're not coming in as sales consultants or marketing consultants, so I don't know that we try to dig into what those KPIs are like, how much does acquiring a new client cost them, unless, we're trying to implement technology that's going to drive that cost down for them. And that
sure.
happens to be one of the KPIs tied to a business outcome we're hoping them to achieve or
Yeah,
helping them.
good point. So when we take a look at, telling our story, talking about business outcome, do we have any business going down that path if we haven't cleaned our own house first and looked at our own organization and figured out ways that we can have a better outcome in our own organization? Thoughts on that?
I love that you touched on that because I've been doing, part of how I've developed this new approach. It wasn't all by myself. We get coaching. I'll throw, give Pax 8 some love out there, C-Level Ops, Pax 8 Academy. We've been having their sales coaching, and it's really a lot of this comes from the results selling framework. But, it's been a while since they've been coaching me on that. And it didn't really click, with our whole team, I should say, until we redid our mission, vision, values,
Okay.
right? And our, our mission high level is through curiosity and adaptability, we help achieve positive big business outcomes for clients, right? There's nothing about diving into technology with that.
Yep.
Our three core values, right? We've got process-based excellence, continuous improvement, and you probably know me, stoicism is the third one. And they kind of intertwine with each other, and they really relate to this people process technology, right? We try to define a process for everything. The minute we have a process defined, we have a baseline for quality of service. You can't really increase quality of service if you're not delivering a consistent level of service defined by some processes.
Yeah.
Once there's a process defined, if something goes wrong, now you can blame the process. And we have ownership from our team in helping develop these processes and make them better. Continuous improvement is constantly looking at our processes and how we can improve them. And stoicism at a high level is let's focus only on the things we can control, right? It's the 80-20 rule, maybe even, right? What's in our control that we can actually develop a process around versus the things that are out of our control that might distract us from paying attention to the things that are truly in our control. So we've, as a leader of my team, I redeveloped those. We live and breathe those. We talk about them regularly in everything we're doing. I even hear comments in meetings come up, when there's an issue with a client. I heard one of my employees say, well, what can we control about this situation moving
Hmm.
forward? Right? I'll give you one classic example. internet goes out, right? Out of our control. Client gets upset. Obviously they know it's not our fault, but we still have an upset client that's down.
Yeah.
And, regardless, we feel that pain. Well, what's the answer? Well, what's in our control is understanding that if this happens again, we can look at business continuity. Should we discuss getting a backup internet connection in place? That's what's in our control for this type of situation. And so when, those three values and looking at, following the people process technology internally, right? Understanding what are our challenges with our people. I used to always, shiny tool object guy here, I'm in a support group for that. Um, I used
Yeah.
to think tools, it was all about tools. I got to find a tool to solve my problems. And I was
Right.
just like shoving tools down my team's throat saying, this tool is going to solve this tool is going to solve that.
Yeah.
And it really disrupted a lot of our internal operations and even quality of service while I'm sitting here thinking a tool is going to solve my problems, not really understanding that people and process come first,
Yeah.
right?
There,
You caught shiny object syndrome from Chris Johnson.
Yeah, probably.
I think he's the root cause.
Yeah.
no, that, I mean, that, and obviously, the order, technology is last, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
yeah, people process technology. And, yeah, so I mean, and that focus has to be there. But so what are some other things that you've done internally, to shift that mindset? What have you done in order to build that culture where others are thinking the same way? Because let's face it, we all think differently, much differently than any of our employees. But that doesn't mean that they can't share in those thought processes. We want them to be part of that. But it just doesn't happen by, a waving of a wand. It doesn't happen overnight. It does take time.
Well, and yeah, and it even takes time to develop new habits to actually follow the process too, right?
Right.
We through coaching, we've learned more and more best practices. I would say, if there's a process for an MSP to follow, it's the ITIL framework. So
Yeah.
we started out with training on ITIL. We aligned a lot of our processes with ITIL. We also moved to full triage and dispatch, where we have a full-time service coordinator, so our engineers aren't even managing their schedule anymore. And those are probably the biggest process changes internally that's really helped us create a baseline quality of service that we can now start to improve. But you're right, if they don't feel like they have buy-in in these ideas, they're going to be less likely to want to follow them. We did go, we had some employees leave, because they didn't like this new, some of them even called it corporate feel. I didn't feel
Mhm.
like it was corporate. I just felt like we were trying to get more organized and be more professional.
Right.
But every time we came up with a new process, which we learned from our coaching, we put together and agreed to as our leadership team, before we implemented it, we would have a meeting with the team to talk about it and explain the why behind it and the value and the business outcome we are hoping to reach, right?
Right.
And open it up for discussion and said, does anyone have anything they feel like they can improve with this process? Anyone have any concerns, questions? So essentially trying to get the team's buy off before we actually go to market with it, if you will, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, and I do want to throw out a plug you did earlier with the Academy for PAX 8. One of the things that Craig Donovan talked about, which his podcast episode will be published on Monday. So for the full details, watch that episode. But he talked about their guided growth program, which
Mhm.
is very intriguing that, through the guided growth program, you're filling out an assessment, and it's helping to identify areas of the academy that make sense for you and are a fit for you to achieve your goals and objectives from a training perspective. So I thought that's quite intriguing.
That's a great call out because, we are 20 years, 10 people. There's different maturity levels that you
Yeah.
reach, right? If you start out as a one-person MSP, there's certain things you should be spending your time and focusing on. That you grow to a five-person MSP, that changes, right? You should be focusing on other things. So identifying kind of a maturity model, which is what they've done, and helping you understand where you're at so that you're not focusing on the wrong things, to help you get to the next level, I think is a great idea.
So, as we're starting to wrap up over the next 9 minutes here, one of the things that we're talking about business outcome, there's always the what's in it for me and how does this affect my organization? Because of course, there's many benefits here. I'm a true believer that stickiness is not about our stack. Stickiness is about who we are and how we help them reach their goals and drive their business forward. But it comes down to um, how do we drive more sales? So can you give us some examples of being focused on business outcomes help you sell without selling?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, um, if the client feels like they were heard, I think if we go back to humans just want to be heard and seen,
Yeah,
right? And helping the client feel like it was their decision to make the investment, right? Regardless if you came up with the idea or you're the one selling it to them, right? It was their idea that they feel like it was their idea that they want to make this investment. When I think about a new lead, for example, the first meeting is really discovery, all about them. I'm talking very little about me. And it's really to get to know everything we've been talking about on this podcast. The second meeting, ideally is not just me giving them a proposal and saying, here's how much it costs to work with us, right?
right.
It's more presenting everything that you've discovered, in a proposal format, um, to verify, hey, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything here. Is this what we heard, right? Is this everything you're looking for when it comes to, why you reached out to us in the first place? Getting that sign off and then actually talking about how we're going to help them reach their goals, right? Again, not talking about us and how cool our stack is and why we're better than the next competitor,
Right.
but really focusing on how we're the right company to help them reach their goals. And you don't have any costs that you're even talking to them about in this meeting, ideally. And it's just helping make sure that yes, we heard them correctly and answering and helping them understand how we're going to help them reach these goals and making sure you answer any questions about that. So that literally after that meeting, you're like, great. It sounds like, we understand what you're looking for. You understand how we're going to help you reach this. Let me go put the pricing together now that I've verified everything here with you in this meeting so we can understand what this investment might look like moving forward. And then the third meeting, if you can get that with them, this is where it gets tricky. Sometimes they're like, all right, well, just send me the cost because we're looking at three other companies, and we'll get back to you if we're interested in, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes that third meeting may not happen unless you're one of the final, two companies they're looking at. But at least when you send them that proposal, nothing new in it. There's nothing new in it other than the cost you added. So you don't have to worry about whether or not they even understand the proposal you sent them because you had the opportunity to go over it with them before you even talk cost,
Yeah.
right? But
And
ideally, you're having that third meeting where you're presenting the cost in the meeting. And guess what? That meeting's kind of short and sweet because you've already gone over the proposal. They're not seeing anything new with the proposal other than the pricing.
right.
So we can just talk about the pricing. Now, what does that look like if there's pricing objectives, right? Well, this is more expensive than someone else we've got a proposal from. First question is, no problem. What's changed from what we really originally talked about? Are they offering something different than what we talked about? Right? Start to dig into are you looking for something different? because maybe we approached this, maybe we didn't hear everything that you said, right? Make it not about you at all. Make it about them and be almost empathetic to, oh, wow, I didn't, I understand completely, but help me understand better, like what's changed or what's different about their proposal that maybe we didn't include or we included too much. You know what I mean?
And correct me if I'm wrong, but what you mentioned earlier is your proposal format has changed then, where you're leading that proposal with the what those business outcomes are from the start, and then it's flowing into what are the technology components that you will use to achieve that. So it doesn't come across like this whole conversation about their business is just some big facade, just some way to sell them something. It is, but it's not.
Yeah, it's really a proposal for the economic buyer. It doesn't get into the weeds technically at all.
Right.
Now with our co-managed clients, if we're dealing with a technical buyer, they're going to want to understand some technical aspects. But for the average small business, you're dealing with the economic buyer, and it's, here's what we heard around the business outcomes you're trying to reach, the challenges, impacts, and then here's the solutions we're recommending to overcome that. Here's how we do it. Here's how we do it better. Here's proven success, case studies of how we've done it with some other people. It's that simple.
So as we wrap up in the next 3 minutes here, what are your suggestions for an MSP who says, Brian, this stuff sounds great. This is something that I want to start doing. I want to shift my focus. How do they start?
Well, we didn't make it happen without the help of a coach, right?
Okay.
And so I'll go back to the Pax8 Academy. I love the framework that they have in place. We use their operations coaching as well. So we have sales and operations coaching. The operations coaching is really what helped us improve our internal operations around the ITIL framework. So I think trying to do this on your own is going to take longer. I mean, it took us 20 years to get here.
Yeah.
So if I look back with the approach I used, in the past 2 to 3 years, I probably could have gotten here in 10 years, maybe, you know.
Okay.
But I would say question how much time you're spending working in your business and start setting aside time weekly to start working on your business and try to use some form of guidance so that you don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel.
Excellent. All right. Excellent discussion. I really appreciate all of your time today. And we are at the top of the hour. And as always, appreciate it, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
very interesting. I didn't even interrupt once to make a joke.
I know, I know, it was left to me.
That's awesome. Love it. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.
So